So black redstarts in Britain, their history is quite interesting because they colonised areas that were bomb sites, and they proliferated particularly after the Second World War.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. You've got one of your co-hosts, Billy Brown.
Tony Crosdale.
And we have our guest host,
Seth Deginger.
And this is our long-awaited war episode. This is actually also the final episode of our second quote-unquote season. We, like what is now going on 2 years ago, we're doing interviews and pulling together ideas and brainstorming and doing pieces about a range of topics, and we lump them together in ways that thematically made sense. Like our very first episode was about large carnivores in cities. So we looked at, for example, leopards in Mumbai, and we looked at hyenas in Addis Ababa, and those sort of went together. Here we are at the end with the very last one, the war episode. Before I forget, please make sure to rate us on your podcast listening app of choice, whether that's Stitcher or iTunes or Apple Podcasts these days, or Google Play, anywhere else you're listening to us. If you do, assuming you like the podcast, please give us a nice rating, leave a comment. We appreciate that. Please hit us up on Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast and send us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. We love ideas that our listeners generate. After this season is up, we're going to, I think, be a little more opportunistic about episodes, and as you have great ideas, please let us know and we can work it into an episode.
Absolutely. And if you are a researcher yourself and you think what you do is applicable, we will pretty much absolutely do an interview with you. So get at us.
And interview, or even if you want to be out, if you're out in the field, even if that's like a vacant lot in Phoenix or something, recording something from the field, that's great stuff. We love to include that, or maybe even build an episode around it.
Hey, podcast listeners. I have a quick correction to note. In our episode, Things That Go Flap in the Night, we referred to it being in the style of the Field Notes podcast. I got that wrong. It's really the Field Guides podcast, something we all should just totally know off the top of our heads because we love the Field Guides podcast. So if you like the Urban Wildlife podcast, check out the Field Guides podcast. You'll love it.
Seth.
Yes?
Tell us about yourself.
Tell you about me. In relation to this, I served in the Army Reserves for 6 years, and as I was just telling these gentlemen, I'm thinking about doing another 6. Again, just in relation to this, I deployed once to Helmand Province, Afghanistan. But in addition, I have visited lots of Army bases around the U.S. and Canada and various other places. I was in Kyrgyzstan, and I happened upon a lot of interesting wildlife that I didn't necessarily expect to see there.
Okay, and we'll hear a little bit about that as we
Yes.
go. How do you guys know each other?
Punk scene.
That's what I was
Punk
gonna
scene,
guess.
high school.
Yeah, Northeast Philly, yeah. But then
1992 or 3 we met?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We spent way more time probably on South Street than we did in Northeast Philly.
It's true.
Because why would you?
Yeah. Diners.
Yes.
This
yes.
is when South Street was cool.
South Street is still cool for somebody, I'm sure. If you want to buy some nice sneakers. Or...
You know what the sad thing was? Is South Street was cool like 3 years before we got there.
Yeah.
Like,
It was already a tourist trap by the time we got
Yeah,
there.
it wasn't like
What?
not even really. It was just like weird. Like there was a couple stores, but like there was like a couple like skins. Was it? There's a couple stores that like were actually cool and sold cool punk stuff.
Zipperhead.
When it was Zipperhead was
Pants.
yeah. And
There were still record stores
Yeah,
back in the day when people listened to recorded music.
yeah. Philly Pizza Company, as featured in Punk Rock Girl by
Yeah,
Dead Milkman.
true. My kids don't even know what a VCR is.
It's a weird era too, where
We
like
have one still. That's what
Yeah.
now people are way more shizned, but back then it wasn't just punks. It was like goths and industrial kids and just people wearing long sleeve XL Dinosaur Jr. shirts, even though they were like skinny people.
Yeah.
You know, like that was just like whoever, and people, just weirdos, just all hung out together. Now I feel like you pick your subgenre and go with it. Then we just a bunch of freaks hanging out, drinking Wawa iced tea at the fountain in South Street.
So cool. We'll hear more about Seth and his travels and stuff very soon. In this second season, we've heard various ways about how cities change over time. Like, for example, in the first episode of the season, we looked at hyenas in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. But also in that interview, talking about those hyenas, we were hearing about how as Addis Ababa gets more built up and vacant lots and that kind of thing get turned into buildings, that the hyenas are kind of getting forced out. So sort of the change in landscape in cities and how wildlife and plants respond has been a topic of ours that's run through a few episodes. But nothing changes a city perhaps more abruptly and violently than war. And this is the twist in my head about it, is on the one hand, it's hard to imagine anything being worse than being in a city that's under siege or it's just in war. I mean, you think of recently like Fallujah or Raqqa or Aleppo, those places like no human being would want to be. But then what happens to the people, well, people like us we wear different hats, but like people who are naturalists, who are birders or herpers or butterfly people or whatever, what happens to, how do we experience war, or how do we look at war and how it affects the cities? Birders don't ever really stop birding. It's hard to imagine a situation when Tony wouldn't look up at the sky and or hear something calling and then look up. Safe to say?
There's not a situation where that wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Tony will be on his deathbed and then hear something calling out the window and ask them at the hospice to open the window so we could hear it better, you know?
I once had I went over to this girl's house and we were getting it on, and I literally had to you got to turn off this documentary. It was there was Nature Channel was on, and I had turn it off. No way I'll be able to pay attention to what's going on.
We heard in the recent Palestine episode about how Imad Atrash of the Palestine Wildlife Society, back during the second Intifada, still took groups out on nature walks. You know, in sort of the research about urban nature and war, I came up with some other examples. The UK, particularly London, during the Blitz and during World War II in general, was an interesting topic. One of the phenomena that came up in sort of immediate post-war, or maybe even during the war, I don't know, in London was was how a certain kind of songbird called a black redstart ended up occupying new habitat, which was the bomb craters left from, or just overall bombed out areas left over from the Blitz. And so when we were talking to David Lindo, aka The Urban Birder, for that episode, when Taiki and I were interviewing him, we asked him a little bit about the black redstarts, and so I'm going to play that now. David Lindo talking about black redstarts.
The black redstart is a very handsome bird, in my view. It's if you can imagine something like a phoebe, it's that kind of size. So like an eastern phoebe or Say's phoebe, that kind of size. But that's where the resemblance ends. And the black redstart male, as the name suggests, is predominantly black, greyish black on its body. And it's got this amazing red tail that it wags, it quivers. And that's how they get their name, redstart, because they have that quivering. You've got a species called the American redstart, which is, in fact, one of your American warblers. But it's not related in any way, really, just by name. So black redstarts in Britain, their history is quite interesting because they colonised areas that were bomb sites, and they proliferated, particularly after the Second World War, up until, I say, the early 70s, when redevelopment started. The reason why they like the bomb site areas is because the habitat there, which is all very derelict, resembles the natural habitat, which is cliffs. Well, they live on the coast normally, places, rocky areas. So it resembled the scree that they'd find in those areas. So they quickly became urban birds in Britain. I think the first nesting record was actually back in 1923 when Wembley Stadium was being built. So literally a stone's throw from where I lived when I was a kid, but back in 1923. But the thing is, since the 70s, their numbers have declined because of rebuilding. And it's now got to the point, I think there's less than 100 pairs at any given time during the summer nesting at the max. Normally it's less than that. But there are winter visitors in winter, obviously, that come over from the continent, which sort of boost the numbers. And they tend to turn up and hang out along the coasts.
Okay.
Interestingly, when you go across the channel into France and into Europe, black redstarts become very common, particularly in urban areas. And for many years, people are wondering, how come they're common there and they're so rare in Britain? And one suggestion is that our very own robin, our national bird, they are in Britain very much city and urban birds, and robins attack anything with a red tail. I've seen it myself. When I see a black redstart, they attack them on sight. They're dominant over black redstarts even. They're dominant over them, and then they force them out.
Okay.
Whereas in Europe, the robin is still essentially a woodland bird, like it was in Britain up until the Victorian age. So the black redstart has been able to colonize urban areas in Europe without being threatened by robins. So that could be a possibility as to why they're so rare in Britain. But they're fantastic birds. They are iconic urban birds. They are found in Britain, in London predominantly, but also in Birmingham and further north in Manchester. They're the sort of main areas, Sheffield as well, with other spots around by the coast, but mostly in those urban areas.
So similar to the observations of black redstarts, London naturalists were observing all sorts of stuff. And so I had found articles published by the London Natural History Society. I pulled them out of a book called London's Changing Natural History, classic papers from 150 years of the London Natural History Society, published in 2008, and also looked at the introductions to the different sections of articles. People started getting out and observing the changes in plants and wildlife starting in 1941 and into 1943, and then in 1947 got a lot more organized about it, and then published papers from 1948 through 1955 focusing on places that had been bombed. In London, they focused on an area called Cripplegate. All right. I haven't been there either. Okay, because I've never been to London.
I've been to London. I've never been to Cripplegate.
Great name, isn't it?
It is.
I've just been to the airport.
So
That's all.
someday we got to make it to Cripplegate. And so it was heavily bombed during the war, and they sort of approached it like any botanist or ecologist would, I guess. They sort of set out lines and divided it into plots to study, would do transects of the area, see what they would observe, and visit places over, like, through the seasons, over the years, to chart, like, what plants were growing in, what kind of bugs were flying in and getting established. They categorized habitats particular to a ruined area. So, like, they would have, like, a 4-part categorization that included, like, basement floors, because you would have buildings that had been bombed and basically were gone, and even if you cleared away the rubble, you'd still have the basement pit, which became its own sort of microhabitat they would study because it would hold water a little bit. Even if the water kind of trickled out through the cracks, it would still have a lot of moss and sort of semi-aquatic stuff. I got a kick out of seeing species that we have in Philadelphia that are wasteland plant species. So, like, they have a lot. They found, like, our horseweed growing in a lot of places, lamb's quarters. These are things that you'll see growing out of the cracks in your sidewalks pretty much anywhere in America, and indeed Europe as well. I mean, you imagine all these people had, like, if they were in London during the Blitz or had that experience fleeing to the countryside, I mean, people they would have known who got killed and their lives totally upended, and who knows what else was going on in their lives, but still, this for them was a weird opportunity to jump on a novel ecosystem right in their backyards. And in a similar vein, I had looked at research on the other side of the war, I guess, the ecology of ruins in Germany, focusing on Berlin. There's a historian of science named
Jan
Lachman, a historian of science, wrote a neat article in 2003 in the journal Osiris called "Exploring the City of Rubble: Botanical Fieldwork in Bombed Cities in Germany After World War II." Perfect for this. And talked about how Berlin was like a third destroyed in World War II, and the ecologists there seized on the moment to study what plants would grow up in the rubble. for example, our black locust trees apparently did very well over there. And we have a German friend, we were asking him about it, and he was like, of course there's black locust trees everywhere. And it was sort of like evident to him that they're just a common tree species in Berlin, but apparently a combination of like the land getting just like totally bombed, and then a lot of new people and trucks driving through and everything else, like war equipment driving through, like help spread the seeds of those.
Black locusts are an American tree, so did the Americans bring them over?
I guess maybe they were there as like ornamental or garden kind of plantings, and then
Just like often an alien species does really well in disturbed areas because of the competition gets thrown out of whack. It makes
exactly,
sense, yeah.
and the competition was gone because it was like obliterated by bombs. And so you also had Ailanthus trees popping up everywhere, which that also happened here without bombs, and then goldenrod, solidago.
Soldago. I mean, I'm sure. All Latin names are pronounced differently by different people.
Solidago giganteana. This paper focused on a ruined patch in the city. I'm going to mispronounce this too. A triangle of land called something like the Dürnberg Drake. Apologies to my friend Matthias and any other Germans who might be listening. This was an area that ecologists had studied up through the early 80s. And so then like most of the city that had been bombed, people redeveloped it. No one was like, hey, let's leave the ruins when it's a third of the city. So the researchers, the ecologists, have been studying it in what struck me as a kind of funny incident. In 1978, the authorities had cut back some of the trees and cleared it out a little bit because it was a popular place for prostitutes to sleep with their johns, and they wanted to open it up a bit. But that, of course, like tore out all these trees that the ecologists had been tracking and studying. And then
It comes up a lot where you're like, me working in parks where I'll lead a bird watching trip and they'll have great birds in the canopy, but there'll be no like understory birds except for like maybe like the one plot that's a urban garden, and there's like sparrows like in the in the fallow plants or whatever. But whenever I bring up like wanting to put in some understory, people are like, no, prostitutes will be in there. It's like the effect of fear of prostitution on the understory of urban parks is a real phenomenon.
And I think it's a pretty minimal impact. I mean, like, as someone who's spent a lot of time in the Mount Moriah Cemetery, number one, there was like a couple mattresses back there, which I'm sure were actively used at night. And I would go out there and turn them over to look for snakes. And there were tons of snakes under those mattresses. They were awesome. And then, you'd see condoms and like used douches, I guess. I mean, like, that kind of stuff. But like what was much worse was people dumping like pit bulls back in there.
Yeah.
Because some of them would just be pathetic, and some of them would run out and like bark their heads off at you and kind of scare you if you're in the middle of like this giant cemetery. So of all the things I was scared of, it wasn't the prostitutes.
Or mattresses.
Or mattresses, exactly. Like a mattress at 11 o'clock in the morning, what's it going to do to you?
Yeah, not much.
I wouldn't want to roll around in it naked, perhaps, but that just wasn't in the cards that day.
And getting asked if you want to party every once in a while is not the worst thing.
Yeah. So, anyhow, the Berlin authorities disagreed. And so then later on, there was a bigger struggle over the space when they wanted to build a hotel there. And ultimately, they built a hotel that sort of ruined it as a study plot, apparently. It was interesting to see a similar struggle that we have when it comes to developing urban wasteland in general. The coal piers in Port Richmond. So there's this big area.
It's huge.
It's huge. And it's mostly overgrown. People go fishing there. I'm sure I'd find some mattresses back there if I looked. A lot of kids just go there to spray paint stuff.
Ride dirt bikes.
Exactly. And there are neat snakes back there. And it's also just a oddly beautiful kind of place when you're on this like forested, decrepit old...
I've gone there with you.
Yes, you have gone there with me.
I bet it's probably, like 30 acres? It's big.
It's big.
It's really big.
And so there's talks of it being developed because it's this big... If you want to develop if you want a big tract of land in the city that doesn't already have something on it, it's a pretty choice spot. I mean, it's right off of I-95. I mean, a few blocks off the Elbe, but still not terribly far. It's right on the river, so if you wanted to do something that involved the river, it's right there. And so it's a sweet spot. I mean, it's right off Columbus Boulevard. You understand why someone would build on it. I would encourage that in a sense because it's better than tearing down an area out in the countryside to build something. But I would lose a place that I treasure as like an urban natural space, I see birds that are probably unremarkable once you're out, like in New Jersey and stuff, but it's not uncommon for me to text Tony from there, being like, okay, I see something that looks like a warbler. It's like a bold sort of black and white pattern. It's working like up and down trees. He's like, it's a black and white warbler. Like, okay. And so that kind of thing. Or I see lots of butterflies there as the seasons go. It's a pretty great place. But I'm going to be pissed off when somebody finally develops it, even though I kind of get it. And then another interesting element of this whole Berlin story is that a lot of what we think now these days, urban ecology is sort of having a moment, but it's been several decades in the making. And a lot of the fieldwork techniques and sort of the way people think about how to study urban wastelands and spaces came out of this, I guess, German research into bombed city spaces. Although I feel like I see the same kind of thing when I read the London articles too, doing similar kind of work. But the idea of applying the fieldwork techniques that you would use out in the Amazon basin or something to bomb craters in London or Berlin, then is an easy transfer over to would you apply that to the plants growing up in the cobblestones in the old city of Philadelphia or something. So it was an interesting sort of historical moment for urban ecology research.
So I see the analogy between the deindustrialized spaces and the bombed out spaces. But is there any comparison to places, urban or otherwise, that have been destroyed by natural disasters and how they are repopulated by plants and animals?
No idea.
I'm sure there isn't. That's another episode in the works.
Okay.
Yeah. Field trip to Houston.
It seems that, that's exactly what I was thinking. Puerto Rico is what I was thinking, but San Juan.
You can drive to Texas,
yeah. Puerto Rico's a long drive.
I'll be there in a couple weeks.
Texas or Puerto Rico?
Texas.
What are you doing in Texas?
Well, it's where my fiance's family's from.
Oh, by the way, Tony got engaged.
I did indeed. And
I don't see a ring.
And
just gotta make an honest man of you.
we also just took a new step too. We got a cat.
Wow.
We took in so I'm going to Dallas to visit Angie's family for Christmas, but because I have way more time than she does, I'm flying 5 days early and I'm doing a little whirlwind tour around like Central Texas from Dallas to the coast and back.
No, but dude, we had a little snippet from a dude a herper in Texas, in Dallas, because the Trinity River is this like river that flows through Dallas. It's been kind of channelized and has like, it looks really ugly apparently, but it's got like some bottomland forest along it. So if like you're in Dallas and you want to, if you're really jonesing to walk on a trail and be sort of in nature, he goes there and he finds tons of what to me they're common snakes, but still interesting stuff, like broad-banded water snakes and cottonmouths and copperheads and stuff. I don't know how it is for birding, but I imagine it would be like if you're in Dallas and just want to get away for a minute, like it's a nice spot.
Yeah.
So tell us about the cat.
Yeah, so Andy's friends, there's a cat that's been visiting their backyard. The cute little tortoiseshell.
Exotic, invasive.
My cat Lola died 2 weeks after Angie and I moved in together, and her cat died 2 weeks before we moved in together. And I think it's been, a few months now and enough time to mourn our cats and get a new one. And, this cat won't be eating any wild animals anymore. It'll be eating plenty of domestic animals that we had slaughtered to feed it, but it won't be.
It might eat some mice that make it into the house.
Yeah, well, my whole idea is people are like talking about animal rescue, that like taking in a feral cat does something good for animal rights. Kind of goes out the window when you consider that you have to kill animals to feed it. Doesn't really, And
the vegetarian in me totally agrees with you.
I think I learned that there's
I still have a freezer full of mice and rats to feed to my snakes.
Yeah, and I think there's like about a third of the meat consumption in America is for pets.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Apparently, we feed the human population of France.
Hey, podcast listeners. To learn more about environmental impacts of food consumption by dogs and cats, read the article, Environmental Impacts of Food Consumption by Dogs and Cats, by Gregory S. Oken, published August 2nd, 2017, in the journal PLOS ONE.
I'll just like to point out that Tony, who likes to start fights on Facebook about whether one should support feral cats outdoors or bring them indoors, even if that means euthanizing ones that can't find homes. Tony is often cast as sort of a cat hater. And he is far from it.
Yeah, they're incredible. They're incredible companions. You know.
I just euthanized my cat of 17 years.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
just a couple weeks ago. I
shame.
have another cat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My cat is 17.
14
Do you want
years.
any more?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
It just happened.
One thing, though, mentioning about the bombing and disturbance,
Yeah.
Locally, a phenomenon that we have is at Warren Grove bombing range in the Pine Barrens is one of the best spots to see Pine Barrens gentian and a few other cool plants because of the constant disturbance.
And also, every few years, it seems like, maybe it's every longer than that, but every now and then, they sort of forest fire down there.
Yeah, fire is part of the ecology. A lot of the trees are just rottenness.
Right.
You know, so an F-16 dropped a flare by accident onto the Pine Barrens, and it went up like no one's business.
And it's actually not bad for the forest, you know?
It's actually good for the forest.
It's good for the forest.
What's crazy is like they have like all these like shipping containers like set up as like targets, and like in the middle they have like a mosque, like it looks like a mosque, and the idea is like I guess
Don't hit the mosque.
Yeah, don't hit the mosque. It's kind of crazy to like think that like to think about that, you know.
Maybe it's a crude segue.
I've actually been on a lot of ranges like that have, mock villages that you have to walk through just, for training purposes. And there's always a mosque, and you have to treat it differently than all the other buildings, rightfully.
Yeah.
And but sometimes they put their snipers in their mock snipers in the mosque. So, but speaking of forest fires, that made me think of I was on just a regular machine gun range in Texas at Fort Hood, and we started probably 50 fires a day because the heat of the bullets just hitting the dry foliage. It was I believe, if I recall correctly, a 50 cal machine gun range. We actually eventually tasked out a crew eventually to drive down and put out the fires. We gave them shovels. We didn't have any water. We were in the middle of the desert or not desert, but dry land of
country,
central
yeah.
Texas. Yeah.
Fort Hood's known for having they do good work there with they have a good population of golden cheek warblers.
Oh, really?
The only breed in the hill country of Texas, and is Fort Hood's one of their main strongholds.
Cool. So, what else did you do when you were in Helmand?
Yeah, I was in Helmand. On the way to Helmand, we stopped in Kyrgyzstan, and something I noticed immediately was the amount. We went to Manas, which is I think it's a former Soviet air base that the Americans had been renting from the Kyrgyz for a decade, I suppose, to use for our purposes in Afghanistan, because it's relatively close to Afghanistan. And one of the things I immediately noticed there was the amount of birds, actually. And I thought of you, Tony, because I'm not a birder. My father was a birder, and I thought of him and you. And they were really odd-looking birds. I wish I knew enough about birds to tell you what
I should have brought the guide to the center.
some of them were big, and they weren't, crows, but they were, crow-sized birds and just very odd-looking to my untrained eye. And the only thing I could imagine is that they were drawn to us because we just waste a lot of food, and I'm sure they were really drawn to the airstrip. We didn't bomb anything out there, but definitely we're changing the ecology. Where we were staying, it was all what they call transient housing. It was all people on their way in or out of Afghanistan.
Okay.
Which was, it's still a 5-hour flight to Afghanistan, but it's where a lot of the staging is done. And it's probably a 10-minute drive from the airport. So I don't know if it related to that more than just a bunch of Americans throwing food on the ground.
That would have something to do with
And
it.
a ton of birds, and
And who knows what the trash disposal process was, or
probably very little food.
probably not a big capped landfill with.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I really don't know. I mean, I know in Afghanistan we just burnt everything, but yeah. But Kyrgyzstan's a beautiful place. Big mountains. They make the Rockies look little.
Yeah.
They're really big mountains.
Is that kind of like the edge of the Himalayas?
It is. I believe it is.
This is the
I think it's
Hindu Kush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
okay.
kind of the spur of the Himalayas. And they're big mountains.
Oh man.
Big mountains. So yeah, then I went to Afghanistan, and I mean, one of the, I don't know how to even discuss this. One of the more interesting wildlife sightings, we were actually on base Leatherneck in Helmand, and we were taking a class about identifying homemade explosive, and we were all just sitting there taking a break, and a jackal about 20 of us just sitting around, just sitting in the sand, and a jackal was probably, I'd say, 100 meters from us, and just started walking up like, hey, what's up, sort of thing, eyeing us up. There were 20 of us, and I think he got the idea that was probably not the best idea to keep approaching. We were all carrying rifles or heavier stuff, and he just he didn't run away. He was very, I don't know, he didn't run away, but he was clearly scared of us, but didn't want to show it, and just sauntered off eventually. I don't know what jackal's normal behavior is, but...
What you saw was most likely a golden jackal.
Okay. That's what you were talking about in Tel Aviv, also?
In Tel Aviv also. They have a huge range.
I saw one of Sri
That's a
Lanka.
huge range. 'Cause Tel Aviv is...
They go into Africa too.
Oh, they got it right.
Awesome.
Red bill. They go into Africa. They go from, like, you've seen them in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Are they kind of the...
End up in southeastern Europe.
Are they kind of like the old world's version of a coyote?
It's exactly what they are.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, the strange thing though is that apparently coyotes like evolved from wolves and not from jackals.
Right.
Like they didn't like it's not like a coyote is a jackal that went through the Bering Sea.
Right.
You know. Apparently they're like an offshoot of like their closest relative is a gray wolf,
Okay.
and they hybridize themselves sometimes.
Parallel evolution to the golden jackals.
Yeah.
Convergent evolution.
Yeah.
Is parallel evolution a thing? Did I just make that word up?
I'm not sure. You mentioned other things like bears in Alberta and like
Yeah, bears actually were Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
We were at a training in Wisconsin, and I drew the short straw and was sergeant of the guard one night, and all of my guys were sitting out in their guard posts, and we kept getting calls on the radio about bears. So I was the guy, because I was sergeant of the guard, that had to take the walk to all the guard posts and make sure that nobody had gotten eaten by a bear. And we didn't, it was
But
a
they're
training.
black bears.
Yeah.
They're not gonna eat you.
They aren't. They're going to run away.
Yeah.
But it's still a little nerve-wracking.
No, were you armed then in Wisconsin?
Oh, I mean, we had rifles, but we had blanks. It was just training. But I'm
Right.
sure a blank would scare off a black bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Black bears are...
They're wimps.
They are.
No, they're not. They're burly animals, and
burly animals.
they've
If
killed
you-
about as many people as grizzlies.
Well, yeah, but...
There's way more of them though.
Not, like, just happening upon them in the woods, usually. I mean, I remember reading about a recent guy got killed because he was, like, literally poking his head into a den.
Yeah,
You know, like...
but they've also like ripped people out of tents and eaten them. And that happens
Yes.
sometimes.
It doesn't happen that often, considering how many black bears are out there and how many people are.
Well, it's
camping
very
in their
true.
habitat.
But like they're
It's like sharks, you know. Like,
Yeah.
It's gonna happen every now and then, but like, man, I've seen. I don't know, not every day, but I've seen plenty of black bears, and they have all taken off running the second they
Yeah.
realized I was there. That's why I call them wimps, because like, any of them can slaughter me, but like,
Yeah, but they don't have any desire to.
yeah, I go like that, and then like,
Cow could probably kill you if it really
Yeah.
got a bug up its ass to kill you.
Cows are wimps too, you know.
Oh, another weird little critter that we saw everywhere in Afghanistan, and again, I don't really know what they are, but they look like look like a scorpion the size of an ant is the best way to describe it. And I've tried to Google that, and I really don't know what they were, but they were everywhere.
Did they have tails with stingers on them, or were
They had tails that looked like stingers. I didn't get stung by one. It
There,
looked like
there are small scorpions out there.
that they were everywhere.
Yeah.
They were really the size of a
there are scorpions.
biggish ant.
There are lots of scorpions
Yeah.
that size.
And they are tough. We would try to stomp them when they were running across our stuff, and very resilient little critters.
Yeah.
And they can give you a good sting. those
I
little
lived in
ones.
Mexico a little bit in college, and I'd go around my apartment and clear them out.
Really?
Just because they end up on the walls hanging out.
Really?
Yeah,
Well, they were
probably
scorpions.
totally different species, but
I'm sure.
that there are small.
There's also like other weird like arachnids that you know.
The solifugids, is that how you say it? Wind scorpions.
Yeah.
they're like these. They're not really. They're other arachnids. They don't have like tails with stingers on them, but they look like kind of like scorpions and kind of like really burly spiders, and they're like super fast.
I found a tailless scorpion in Philly once in my bedroom in Northeast Philly.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, neat, guys. Any more thoughts on?
Well, I'm gonna over Thanksgiving. I'm gonna record my uncle about the tiger in Vietnam.
That's pretty soon, actually. It's like later this week. All right,
Yeah.
cool.
I hope this also spurs more maybe vets to get in touch with us too. You know.
Yeah, and I think it's also something that vets. I remain in search of someone from Gaza to actually interview. I'm still working on that from our previous Palestinian contacts, and then little things where it's like it might be ridiculous to even try, but there's like birding websites for birders who are traveling around the world, like who you contact when you happen to find yourself in
Fat Bird
Lagos.
of Birding Pal. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like there's still pages up for who you call when you're in Syria. They're from 2012, and like I haven't gotten any of the Syrians to write me back.
Yeah,
because they might be dead or something. I mean, it's awful to think about. They might be in like Belgium, or they might be dead. Who knows?
Yeah. Or they just can't get out messages easily.
They're not on email these days. Yeah.
Right. Or you're not their number one priority.
That's probably true also. And so I'm still curious to hear from the modern day equivalent of the birders in London back in 1943, who were pulling out their binoculars in a lull in the fighting, Hopefully we'll bring some of those kinds of experiences to the podcast also.
Excellent.
So it feels weird to wind up the last episode of our second season, but we've got more stuff in the works right now. So if you have any ideas for us going forward, you can hit us up on Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast. You can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. Please rate us on your podcasting listening app of choice and rate us highly. Spread the word about it. Let your friends know about it. Find us on Facebook and use that as a platform to spread the word. We want you telling people who you think will like the podcast about the podcast, so more people listen to it. Thank you, Seth, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Tony, it's been a great season.
Indeed.
We're concluding something. We're going to see each other. We see each other all the time.
Yeah.
And what we're going to do is we're going to wind up this episode with an interview I did with Nasreen Azimi of Green Legacy Hiroshima. And you'll hear about how after maybe the most horrible, the most landscape-altering act of war in human history, the local gardeners or local tree enthusiasts in Hiroshima found surviving trees, tended to them, and then more recently an organization sprung up to share seeds, the progeny of these bomb blast survivor trees from Hiroshima as sort of like a program of peace. So I thought it was a neat way to end it.
And I saw a beautiful black-eared kite soaring over the museum in Hiroshima. I don't know. It seems beautiful bird soaring over and the museum has this ruins left over of a building from the bombing.
That was awesome. Well, thanks guys for listening.
Cheers. See you next season, which is probably in a couple weeks.
My name is Nasreen Azimi, and my title with regard to the trees is co-founder and coordinator of Green Legacy Hiroshima Initiative, which was founded in 2011, in July 2011. And I'm also a senior advisor at the UN Institute for Training and Research. I was a lifelong international bureaucrat, and the last couple of years I decided that I should throw myself into the life of NGOs and activists. So there. The trees that are classified by the city of Hiroshima as atomic bomb trees are about 170. It's not an exact science, but these are 170 trees within a 2-kilometer radius of the hypocenter. And these are trees that authorities can actually verify as having existed before the blast. We are certain, and our master gardener is also certain, that there are other trees and plant lives that existed, but there is no proof. In other words, the fact that the city of Hiroshima was far-sighted enough to start categorizing these trees some time ago and people actually cared for them, has made it possible to say with certitude these 170 trees existed before the atomic bombing. Now, Nagasaki also has what they call in Japanese hibako jumuko, atomic bomb trees, but they were not as active in registering and categorizing and cataloging them. And so they actually don't have such a clear-cut list of atomic bomb trees. But in Hiroshima, it's certain 170 survived the atomic blast. Of these 170 trees of roughly, I would say about 20 to 22 species, about 40 trees were exactly at the same place that they were at the time of the atomic bombing. By that I mean that the others were either moved, they sprouted from the trunk because everything else had disappeared. But roughly 40 trees within this 170 category of 170 trees were exactly at the same spot. They are bruised, they are wounded, they often have a sort of one side is black, but they have stayed put and they bend because of the damage on one side and the fact that the cells have not grown as healthily for the first roughly 10 years. They tend to bow towards the hypocenter, which sort of gives even more symbolism to these. So there's a professor in the Technology University of Tsukuba, which is near Tokyo, and for the last 3 years, he and his students have been doing a study to identify and figure out the exact latitude and why and how these roughly 40 trees were located. And it's been really fascinating to watch that study unfold as well.
Part of what fascinates me about the project, before we get to the current project, is that someone thought to catalog and sort of recognize these trees. I mean, at what point in, let's say, the rebuilding and recovery of Hiroshima did the project come about to locate and identify these trees?
It was a long process, but I think the saying in Hiroshima, because in Nagasaki the bomb was sort of very spread out, it was on one side of the city. In Hiroshima it really fell in the center. It fell on the Manhattan of Hiroshima. And Hiroshima is a bay, it's a delta, it's surrounded by mountains, which was one reason why the Americans actually targeted it, because they could control, they wanted to see also the effects, and in a bowl, it's in a bowl, so you could better control and understand the effects. But anyway, the entire center of Hiroshima disappeared. 1/3 of the citizens were killed immediately or within a few weeks and months. So there was, for a very long time, actually a couple of months, there was a debate whether Hiroshima could even be rebuilt in the same place. And many were saying, why don't we just go and build Hiroshima 10 kilometers from here? Because we also don't know what is this radioactive ash, and we just know that people are getting sick and falling dead. But this being Japan, the survivors said we are going to rebuild at the place of our ancestors. But there was great gloom, and there was the sense that nothing would grow in Hiroshima. And this saying started that nothing will grow in Hiroshima for 75 years. And then the next spring, there were sprouts that appeared. So the green vegetation was, for such a long time, became a symbol, because that's saying that for 70 or 75 years, nothing would grow. And then suddenly the next season, some shrubs and plants and trees started sprouting. And that really, people use that as some sort of, an encouragement to just come back from death and rethink that their city will, in fact, one day be rebuilt. So the greenery from the very beginning was a very big part of Hiroshima's reconstruction identity. And then there were a few key survivors. In our case, this was a woman. She was, I think, 21 or 22 when the bomb fell. She lost her leg. Her name is Suzuko Numata, her fiancé. She was supposed to get married 3 days, i.e., I suppose, 9th of August, 1945. But just shortly after she heard that her fiancé had been killed only a month before in China on the front. So she had lost everything, and she was contemplating death and suicide. And 3 Chinese parasols, which had been growing in the communications bureau where she was working, these trees just came back to life. And from the beginning, she became some sort of a figurehead for the connection between the trees bouncing back and human beings being able to bounce back. And I think her story, and then, of course, in Hiroshima, the Chinese parasol, which is called the Aogiri, is a very symbolic tree. It's the tree of Hiroshima. Everybody talks about it. And little by little, it didn't happen suddenly. People started associating these trees, and then some citizens groups started marking, oh, this tree existed when I was going to school before the bomb. And I think only in the 70s and 80s did the city of Hiroshima actually start doing a serious listing of which were the trees. Well, then for actually, as I said, the Chinese parasol for a long time has been the tree of Hiroshima. And the city actually always has these little seedlings behind the main Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum that I am looking at right now because I live very close to it. And so they always gave these trees to prominent visitors or visitors who wanted to have some association. But it was done in a sort of ad hoc way. They just gave away these Chinese parasol seedlings. And when I was the director of the UN office in Hiroshima, well, my job was in training. So what we did, we received mostly from Asia Pacific professionals from different backgrounds, and they would come for 1 week executive training. And part and parcel of our program was to go to the Peace Memorial Park and Peace Memorial Museum, because I always felt that if you're holding training program for people from all over the world in Hiroshima, well, the purpose is very clear. You just have to introduce them to this historic event. And people always reacted very emotionally. And whenever they would leave after the week or 2 weeks, they would always ask me, Nasreen, what can we do for Hiroshima? And I knew about the trees because I had encountered them here and there, but they were sort of emerging like solitary figures. And I had never sort of put 2 and 2 together. But when I decided to become a little bit more of an activist, one reason I thought that the trees should be considered as an ensemble, all of them together, was thanks to a book written by a husband and wife team. I will send you the name. It's called Survivors, the A-Bomb Trees of Hiroshima. And this is written by, I think they're Australian and American, or Australian Canadian. Anyway, down under and North America. David Peterson and Mandy Conti. And I saw their book in the library, simple as that. And they had lived 4 or 5 years in Hiroshima, and they had just taken this as some sort of activist hobby by going out every weekend and trying to figure out who were these trees, what was their history, where did they come from. But the single most important contribution they made, at least to my own education, was that they took all of the trees together in roughly 55 locations. And I would say that the only brilliant idea of Green Legacy Hiroshima was to consider, one, that these trees shouldn't just be sent one sapling at a time, but they should be considered as a whole, and that people who would receive the seedlings would have to make a commitment. In other words, partners have to make a commitment that they will actually care for the saplings and do something with them. We don't necessarily say what it is that they have to do with the trees, but they have to have some peace-related or education or nature-related idea. So Green Legacy Hiroshima was basically putting the work of Numata-san, the city, and generations of people who had started sending the Chinese parasol, just expanded that idea, took all of the 170 trees as one community, and decided that if partners were to receive these seeds and saplings, well, they should have some ideas about where to go with them. And that's how it started, and it just spread like wildfire. I mean, we are a volunteer group, and we just can't send enough seeds. And, we want to be selective because quantity is not important for us. But we're in 30 countries now, and we could be in 60 tomorrow if we wanted to. So it's been wonderful because, I'm originally from Iran. I'm a Muslim by birth. I was educated in Christian and Jewish schools. I'm very attracted to Buddhism and Shintoism. And I really wanted to work with something that doesn't need explanations. And trees, as you know, do that. It doesn't matter if you're from Africa or New York City or Persia or China. Tree is a tree. Atomic bomb trees have something to say. And it's just been really a learning curve. One of our most wonderful partners happens to be the grandson of President Truman. And Clifton took, I think, about 12 saplings to the US, and some of them are growing in the gardens by the Truman Library. And the idea is to plant the survivors of Hiroshima, and I think hopefully Nagasaki, on the grounds of the library of Truman Library. And I think the symbolism is just incredible. Hey, thank you so much, Billy. Take care.